Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Shelby Lermo. I play guitar and sing in the band Ulthar.
And Shelby, how would you describe Ulthar? How would you describe your music?
Ulthar is a heavy metal band. We try to remain somewhat unconstrained by genre or subgenre labels, but people most often classify us as black and death metal.
And what's your cat's name?
This is Petunia over here. She is very curious when I come down to the basement to do these interviews. You'll probably hear from her brother Pickle at some point too.
Well, hello, Petunia and Pickle.
Yeah.
Back to Ulthar's music. Unconstrained by genres, but would you say that Ulthar is mostly fast?
Mostly, yeah. We like to slow it down too. We don't try to put too many rules on ourselves, but I think we've tended to speed up and get a little more technical and crazier over the years. I think there was more doomy, sludgy stuff on our first album, and then less on our second, and even less on our third.
And you don't mind Ulthar being referred to as technical?
No.
Okay.
I think we're a pretty technical band, but I think we sort of stand apart from most technical death metal bands because of our more chaotic elements, whereas technical death metal bands sort of, within that genre tend to be very clean and produced, and we try to avoid that.
So, technical, chaotic, mostly fast, mostly not clean. Would that sum it up?
Okay. Yes.
Great. And as far as how Ulthar came together, how did that happen? How did you guys get together, and what were your intentions at the time?
It's a pretty simple story. Not much different from most bands. I was living in the Bay Area in 2013, 2014, and I knew Justin, the current drummer for Ulthar. He lived in New York at the time, but I knew him from booking shows for his old band, Mutilation Rights. And he moved to Oakland in late 2013, and I just knew I wanted to play music with the guy. He's a killer drummer. He's a hard hitter. And so we started jamming around, and then, we knew we needed a bass player. So we hit up Steve Peacock, who is the current bass player still. We've always just been a three-piece, same three people the whole time. And, Steve was down, and that's pretty much it. From the beginning, we started doing sort of more simple, DB kind of stuff, but we grew out of that pretty fast. We had too many ideas to to stick with that format very long.
And as far as the sound that you described and the sound that people associate with Ulthar now, how long did it take for you guys to arrive at that sound?
I think it didn't take long. I think by we had a demo that came before, a 5-song demo that came before our first album. I think by the 5th song, you can already hear the direction or the path that we're still on. I think that our first album, Cosmovore, that came out in 2018, it's a little sloppier and less refined than our current stuff, but it sounds like the same band. I don't think we've deviated too far from how we've always sounded.
Okay. And how do songs come together for you guys?
It's changed over the years. Early on, well, let's see. The easiest, we all live in Oakland and San Francisco. We were a Bay Area based band, so we had a practice space, and we would basically write songs in the practice space, come in with maybe a riff or two and bounce them off each other, put songs together. In the last couple years, Steve moved to Portland, Oregon, and I moved to Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. So we compose all of our music remotely now. Steve and myself pretty much split the songwriting half and half. Um, we write the songs out. We tab the songs. We write it. We write our songs on paper and send them to each other, and demo our songs, and yeah, compose remotely, and then a couple times a year we'll fly out to Oakland and get together and run through everything and learn them together. So it's kind of it's changed a lot over the years, but we've
Sorry,
still maintained that same sound.
sorry. Did you say that you
Go
write
ahead.
songs on paper?
Yeah, like tablature.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do
we didn't do
you?
that through the need to teach riffs to each other. Myself and Steve, we both basically learned to write music so that we could teach each other songs remotely.
And how long did it take for you to learn that?
Not long. I mean, I use a program. We both use a program called Guitar Pro that's pretty commonly used
Right.
with musicians. And I started learning it at the beginning of the pandemic, when I had a ton of time on my hands. So actually, Anthronomicon, our most recent album, our one of two albums, was the first time I'd ever song in music on paper. It was the song Saccades, which is off Anthronomicon. So I don't know. It was pretty easy to learn. I've been playing music for a long time. It was just a matter of changing how I thought about it. And I learned it within a month or two, I guess.
And this process of uh, trading guitar tablatures, did it affect how you uh, thought about the songs themselves? Like, does your approach to song structure change? Did your riff writing change?
Yeah, I think it definitely did, just in that it made me look at the songs in a more detailed and mathematical way. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain, but our early material, we put it together in the studio. We never really wrote anything down. It was just a matter of remembering everything and playing it. And I went through the process recently because we got together as a band in California a couple weeks ago. We got together. I flew out there and we rehearsed for a couple days. And so in preparation for that, I went back and I was tabbing out our old songs, going back to songs off Cosmivore, and putting those on paper for the first time. And it was this funny experience of being like re-experiencing the songs through looking at them as a series of notes and time changes and tempos, because I never really thought of it that way. It was just an organic thing coming out of my hands. So it's weird. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's a much more specific way of writing music. I don't know. I'm glad I learned it, and it has definitely changed the way I write. I write music for all my
Yeah. I'm not. I've actually never used Guitar Pro. Are you also able to record, or is it just tablature?
Um, so Guitar Pro, you can play back the music as you're tabbing it out. So it gives you sort of an 8-bit Nintendo sounding version of your song.
Okay.
Um,
So
but what
kind of
I
like a
do
MIDI.
is Yes, exactly. And what I do is when I write a song, I export it as a MIDI file, and then I import it into, this is some nerd shit. I import it into Logic Pro.
That's the other name for this podcast. Some nerd shit.
Yeah, if you want to get into some nerd shit, I'm here for it. But yeah, I start with all my songs as MIDI, and I program drums to the MIDI, and then I record live guitar over the programmed drums, and that's how I put songs together. That's basically how I do it for all of my bands. And I'll
Okay,
send those demos to the drummers and say, play whatever you want over this. This is just like the programmed drums are what I hear in my head. I
gotcha.
try not to be too much of a tyrant about it.
But besides the MIDI guitars, do you also record with the DAW? Do you record your own guitars, your own guitar
Yeah,
demos, and send them to your bandmates?
yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, with the three of you guys living in three different cities, I'm sure there's a lot of file sharing, right? Going back and forth.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. And this is new for this latest or the latest two releases since you've
Yeah, this
grown.
was our first time doing it this way, was on these two new albums. Providence, our last album, was kind of a half and half thing where we had already started kind of going in that direction just because we were all really busy with other projects. Me and Steve were like writing songs at home, and then uh, yeah, we weren't practicing much in the studio, and it all kind of came together while we were recording the album. Um, so even though we were all living in the Bay Area, we were kind of already moving this direction. But yeah, Anthronomicon and Helionomicon, the two new albums, are the first time that we did everything completely remote, like thousands of miles away from each other.
And this is a this is a strange question, but I mean, composing remotely, you know, putting together songs through tablature. Did the finished album surprise you, or were there elements of it that came out differently from what you expected or what you envisioned?
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of room for tweaking things, and yeah, just sort of like bending ideas here and there. um, for so when I say we split the songwriting down the middle, I mean very literally. Anthronomicon is an 8-song album. Helionomicon is a 2-song album. I wrote 4 of the songs on Anthronomicon and 1 of the songs on Helionomicon, and Steve did the same thing. But the way that Steve does his songs, he does it slightly different from me. He doesn't program drums. He just, he records to just a click track. So when we got to the recording studio, there was a lot more room for creativity with the drums, I guess. Even though we'd kind of rehearsed all the stuff already, the songs, especially his songs, got a lot more fleshed out in the studio. Whereas my songs, when I record the demos, I record 2 guitars and bass, and I program drums, so it's pretty close to the finished product already. But Steve's songs are a little more bare bones, so they really got fleshed out more in the studio. And of course, we hadn't performed any of the vocals yet before we get to the studio. That was just like very improvisational and kind of cool hearing it all for the first time.
Right. And I believe you said that you started working uh, in this method on Providence. Did you guys also split the songwriting for Providence down the middle in the same way?
Not as exactly down the middle as on these albums, but pretty close. Like there was a couple of songs. The song "Furnace Hibernation," me and Steve both split up the songwriting on that song. Yeah, it was pretty close, but not as exactly 50-50 as the new albums.
Okay. I'm curious, how would you describe Steve's style in terms of riff writing or songwriting to your style?
Um, Steve is Steve is a little bit more loose and maniacal than I am. And this is even like boils down to just what our personalities are like. I'm kind of a neat freak, and Steve's kind of a maniac. And that I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all. I've told people I think Steve is a superior songwriter to me. He's an amazing musician and just a crazy human being. But he has another band. He has a solo project called Pandiscordia Necrogenesis. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a one-man black metal band, but he performs live as a one-man band where he has a kick pedal on one foot and a snare on the other foot, and he plays guitar and sings all at the same time, and he improvises all of it. And it's some of the best riffs and best vocals that you'll ever hear for a black metal band. And it's just flowing out of his head. It's like he's like a black metal like jazz musician. The shit just flows out of him. Whereas with me, I think I'm much more calculated, and I like to take my time and look at shit mathematically. Another example I like to give people is if me and Steve just sit down next to each other and open our laptops, my desktop has one neat row of folders that all my projects are in, and Steve's desktop is, you literally can't see what his screensaver is because it's just covered with folders and files and shit everywhere. So I think that's a good example of just like the differences in our approaches. But I think that's kind of the magic behind Ulthar, is it's simultaneously very structured and calculated, but also very chaotic and insane. And I think, like we were talking about, the technicality factor, that's why we don't sound necessarily like the standard quote unquote technical death metal band. Is there's this element of unpredictability and chaos behind things that you can hear in the music.
Yeah. Would Steve be a open a new Windows guy and you be a open a new tab guy?
Yes. Definitely. And I can't have too many tabs open. I'm like I'm an inbox zero guy, basically. I haven't looked at Steve's email ever, but I can guarantee you he is not an inbox zero guy. I guess there's at least a couple thousand emails in his inbox at any given time.
And that's why we're doing this podcast, because you actually answer your emails.
Yeah, right, exactly. He's good. I'm not trying to say that he's irresponsible.
I know. I'm just having fun.
Yeah, he's totally on top of his shit. He's a chaotic person,
Yeah.
and I think it's great.
Yeah. So let's talk about these albums. Anthronomicon and Helionomicon are the third and fourth Ulthar albums, and they were released simultaneously on February 17th through 20 Buck Spin. Let's start with the titles. Anthronomicon, Helionomicon. Am I correct in saying the Book of Man and the Book of the Sun?
Yes.
Okay. And before we get to the concept behind the albums and why you decided to do two albums, were these meant to be listened to in any particular order?
Not necessarily. I think for me personally, I recommend starting with Anthronomicon. And if you enjoy it and feel like you digested it, then dive into Helionomicon, because it's a much more challenging listen, but also more rewarding, I think. But, I'm not going to tell anybody how to listen to our music. I think people should do it however the fuck they want. So yeah, I have my take, but I'm not telling people to do it that way or anything. It's just the way that makes sense to me.
Right. Helionomicon being the more challenging listen because it's two 20-minute tracks, right?
Yeah.
Now, were these? I'm guessing these weren't meant to be played simultaneously.
No, you mean like at the same time, like a flaming
at the same time? Yeah.
No, that would have been much too complicated. I wish
so this isn't. So this isn't like a Times of Grace kind of thing, right?
No.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the concept behind the albums. Book of the Sun, Book of Man. What is the theme and what links these two albums together?
I don't like to go too deep into the meanings of things with Ulthar. I'm not gonna straight up.
Sure. You don't have to explain the songs and the concept. Right. I'm just curious. Right. Yeah.
But
obviously there's intentionality there's intentionality to you releasing two albums at the same time that have similar naming conventions, and something ties the two albums together.
Yeah. I wasn't trying to just dodge your question. I'll still answer the question. I'm just letting you know, as a general rule, I don't really like break down the meanings of our songs. I like people to read the lyrics and try to figure out for themselves. But as you said, Book of Man and Book of the Sun, we were kind of approaching it from the beginning because we conceptualized these albums together, and basically executed exactly what we conceptualized in the first place. There was very little straying from the path over the 3 year course of writing and recording and releasing these albums. Um, but yeah, it started off as like the first album is going to be about mankind, and the second album is going to be about the cosmos and how they relate to each other. And as time went on, and as we worked on the songs more, and as we wrote lyrics, those concepts started getting kind of farther away, and we started kind of branching off and writing about different weird stuff. So there was a basic idea that we sort of strayed from during the course of creating the albums. But we did, we kept them aesthetically similar. We also had the idea of doing the artwork as you see it, like it's one large piece of art that's split down the middle that makes up two album covers. We wanted to have that sort of like aesthetic connection between the two albums, while still maintaining them as separate releases. And if you've seen the packaging at all, like there's kind of a light and dark thing between the layouts of the two albums. So there are aesthetic themes, especially that run between the two albums, if not as much lyrically.
Gotcha. Uh, from what you told me, it sounds like
Yeah.
you envisioned this originally as two different albums.
Yeah, yeah. From day one, that was the idea. And when we came up with that, we were like, "There's no way that $20 Spin's going to go for this idea." And much to my surprise, he was like fully down for it from the beginning. And I think it worked out pretty well. I mean, so far it seems to be working out pretty well. Like Dave at $20 Spin has told me like the albums are pretty much, selling uh, equal to each other. People are buying both albums in the same amount. So it seems to have worked out for everyone.
Right. Well, that's actually something I wanted to ask you. I mean, these were obviously meant to be released together, and they're complementary albums. Why the choice to release them separately, as opposed to like a double CD or a uh, double album set?
Yeah, we just wanted to do something different. Um, that's kind of the expected way to do things, and also we just saw these two albums as their own separate artistic statements. Um, I think that, yeah, the approach on Anthronomicon and the approach on Helionomicon are very different. The music does have, it all sounds like Ulthar, but they are two separate statements, separate enough that I feel that they should be sold as two separate albums, even though there are similarities between them. And yeah, I mean, what it boils down to basically is that we just wanted to do it differently. We're a band that does stuff differently and likes to take chances on stuff, so that's why we did it.
Yeah. And as far as the two long songs on Helionomicon, uh, what were the challenges in composing those, and how did you set out to uh, uh, in terms of song structure to map out what you wanted to do on those songs?
Um, I mean, the challenges are basically exactly what you would expect. Writing a technical death metal song that's 20 minutes long it's very challenging just to come up with that much material and try to keep it fresh and interesting and keep it from bogging down or getting tiresome. It's really hard to write a song of that length that like keeps the right pace and keeps the listener's attention. And I think we accomplished it, me and Steve, in different ways. But yeah, I mean, it was really challenging. It was also really rewarding to a song like that because it just gives you so much space to connect disparate ideas to each other and kind of indulge every weird idea you have within the same song. It was really fun writing that song. And the way I approached it, I won't go too much into the math of it, but it for me it was sort of a numerological mathematical experiment. I like to say the song is sort of constructed like a pyramid. Anthronomicon is the song that I wrote of the two longer songs. And yeah, I sort of built it like a pyramid. And won't explain that too much because I think it might be fun for people to listen and try to figure out what I mean.
Okay. Uh, there are atmospheric elements on both albums. Were those atmospheric parts meant to tie the two albums together, or was it just something that you guys felt you needed to, or felt you wanted to
It's
experiment
something,
with?
yeah, that's something we've always done. All of our albums have had those atmospheric elements to them. Um, so I don't think it necessarily connects Anthronomicon and Helionomicon in any profound way. I think all of our albums connect because they share that same element. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Cool.
I think that that's just. I mean, we're all three of us in the band are fans of ambient music and electronic music and prog rock and uh, it's just something we all have interest in, and we all contributed our own stuff on the albums. That's something that we all work on. Uh, certain interludes I made, certain interludes Steve made, certain Justin actually, our drummer Justin actually did most of the interludes on Anthronomicon.
Okay.
Yeah.
At what point in the process uh, do Justin's interludes come in? Is he working on them at the same time you guys are working on your songs?
Yes. Yeah. We when we showed up at the recording studio, um, I believe. Oh no, we hadn't entirely finished them. I think they were mostly finished. No, it was actually he hadn't finished them until. Sorry, I'm going back in my head now, trying to remember. He finished them after we finished recording the album. I think he was already working on them, but he actually finished out of the mixing process. Maybe he
Okay,
had some done beforehand, but I feel like he was working on them after we'd finished tracking the album and we're like through the mixing process and stuff.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Uh, where did you guys actually end up going to record this?
We went to a studio called Developing Nations up in Baltimore. So our first two albums we recorded at Earhammer Studios in Oakland, and we had a great time working with Greg at Earhammer. We've all three of us in the band have recorded several albums with Greg. He's an awesome engineer and even works as an uncredited producer on a lot of stuff. He's just like great engineer, good guy, knows when an idea isn't working, and will even suggest something better. That always works. So Greg's awesome, but we decided to go with a different engineer, Kevin Bernstein, in Baltimore. So the way we did that was Justin and Steve flew out and stayed with me in Virginia for like 18 days or something like that. And I live about an hour away from Baltimore, so we would drive up every day. We would spend 8 or 10 hours in the studio and then drive an hour back home. So it was 15 days straight of long days in the studio with an hour of driving at each end. So it was a pretty exhausting process, and we just barely finished on day 15. We were in the studio at like 10 p.m. on the 15th day wrapping things up. So it was like we barely snuck in under the wire to finish these albums.
And this is your first time working with Kevin?
Yeah, yeah, and I have worked with him a little bit since. He recorded just the drums on this solo album that I did. I recorded at home. just side gore grind kind of band I do called Human Corpse Abuse. I recorded it all at home, and then he recorded the drums at his studio, and then I mixed it all back here. But yeah, I've worked with Kevin a little bit since, and he's awesome. He's done a bunch of stuff with like Full of Hell and Outer Heaven and a bunch of awesome bands. He's a really cool guy. He also builds guitars. He builds aluminum guitars, which is a pretty crazy hobby to have.
Why Kevin? Why did you choose to work with Kevin?
What? Oh, I'm sorry. You cut out just a tiny bit. He's an old friend of Justin's actually. Justin, like I said, Justin used to live in New York. He was an East Coast guy, and had recorded with Kevin like a decade, 15 years before. And we'd actually stayed when we'd been on tour before in Ulthar. We stayed at Kevin's house twice, I think, and like saw his studio and were just impressed with what he had going on. So. Yeah, early in the conceptual phases of these albums, Justin said he really wanted to work with Kevin, and then it ended up. It was kind of like serendipitous. He wanted to fly out and work with Kevin while we all still lived on the West Coast, so it was just kind of happenstance that I ended up living an hour away from Kevin's studio, so that allowed us to do it that way, and not have to stay in hotels for 15 days or whatever to record with him. I got to sleep in my own bed every night, and everybody got to be comfortable, and we just commuted, so it worked out really well.
And would you say that the sound on these two albums are consistent with what you guys have done in the past?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's little differences here and there, and there's even differences between the two albums. Like we changed production techniques just a little bit between Anthronomicon and Helionomicon, just gave them a little bit of a different feel. um, there's little differences here and there. I think the guitar has kind of a little bit scratchier of like a black metal sound to it, while still being really heavier than our last albums have. The bass is more audible. It's up in the mix a little bit more. It's a little bit grindier than our past albums. But overall, I don't think it sounds hugely different from our last two albums, because we're basically a really easy band to record. Like we sound like we sound live on our albums. There's not a lot of difference between what you hear at a live show and what you hear on our albums. So it's just a
Right.
matter of like capturing it clearly.
Right. I'm curious as far as like the subtle differences between these two albums. Uh, how would you compare them in terms of sound?
I think they're very similar. Like I said, like, there's little bits here and there. I think Justin like used a different snare drum on Helionomicon, and Steve used a different bass on Helionomicon. So there was like little tiny things here and there, but I think it's much more the composition that's the huge difference between the two albums. The
Right.
production differences are pretty minor, and I think they're the sort of thing that you're only going to notice if you're the engineer or you're in the band or you're paying really, really, really close attention to it. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, and tell me about Adam Tucker.
Adam's another old friend of Justin's. He lives in Minnesota. He has a studio called Signature Tone. He's mastered all of our albums, including our demo. Um, and I think I worked with him on some other. I've never worked with him in person, but he does an amazing job on everything. So yeah, he's like the type of person where I was corresponding with him a lot in the mastering process, because I was stuck at home. Maybe we'll get to this more later. I was stuck at home for several months and corresponding with Adam while he was mastering, and he would send me something, and if I heard something that sounded off, I'd point it out to him, and he would send me the new version within like 15 minutes. He's that type of dude that's like super on top of shit, and you know doesn't keep you waiting. He's right there, and he does a great job. So yeah, I can't say enough good stuff about Adam.
Adam's name comes up on this podcast from time to time. He works with a lot of the death metal bands in uh, the Midwest, like Nothingness and Sunless. Uh, What would you
Mhm.
say he brought to your sound?
Um, I think there's a real like there's there's like a grit to our sound still. It sort of goes back to like the controlled chaos stuff we were talking about earlier. We try not to make our sound too clean or too produced sounding, and I think that he understands and respects that and leaves the grit on the music while still, he gives it clarity, but he respects the dirt that we want to keep on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you said something uh, about corresponding with Adam while you were stuck at home. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't mind talking about it. This might get kind of rambly, but I'll
That's
try to
fine.
keep it as brief as possible. But yeah, so I was right after we finished recording these albums last year, which was April of 2022. Um, I was diagnosed with throat cancer in June, yeah, 2022. Which was it was kind of crazy because I started feeling the effects while I was recording the vocals for this album. I kind of got a sore throat that wouldn't go away, and then I was diagnosed with throat cancer like 2 months later. I went through treatment in August and September of last year, and my it was fucking gnarly. I ended up in the hospital for 8 days. I couldn't eat food. I couldn't drink. I couldn't talk for a while. But the treatment appears to have worked, and my prognosis is really good, and it looks like the cancer's gone. I'm waiting on one last test in March to see. So things came out okay, but yeah, like pretty much right after we finished recording this album, things went downhill for me. But like, I don't know, it feels really, the whole cancer process feels really intricately linked to 2 albums because, even I did a lot of work on the layout for these 2 albums, and I was still working on the layout for both of these albums. Like the week that I started radiation therapy, I was sick in bed, like in Photoshop putting together layouts and stuff. So like the whole production of this album was really a kind of crazy journey for me. But yeah, things are looking good now. I do feel a lot better. I'm almost back to my old energy levels. The only thing that hasn't fully recovered is my voice, which is a bummer. It means we can't really book any tours or play any shows yet, but it is improving. I'm just waiting to see, how long it's going to take.
What did your doctor say about doing vocals and getting to do vocals again?
Well, there's not really a good way to go to a doctor and be like, "Hey, I'm in a death metal band. When will I be able to do death growls again?" There's no doctor that has a good answer for that. I went to a speech therapist and I asked her these questions, and she basically just gave me advice and said, run a humidifier in your room, don't drink coffee, don't drink alcohol. I don't drink alcohol anyways, so, but the coffee was kind of tough. So I was just kind of taking her advice and just seeing how it went. The good news is I just scheduled an appointment with a new speech therapist at Johns Hopkins, which is a really really great hospital, and she's a former opera singer apparently. So there's probably no better speech therapist I could be going to to help me on my path to like being able to scream again.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, we don't have to go into this too much. It's all up to you and your comfort level. But I am
Yeah,
curious. This is
I'm wide open. Yeah, I'm an open book. I don't mind talking about it.
yeah. I mean, this is a heavy diagnosis to be handed, no matter what stage of your life you're in. But while you're finishing up these 2 albums, what were your thoughts at the time?
Um, I mean, It's particularly like in as it pertains to the albums, like, well, I guess I can't really talk about it without saying like my entire outlook was like there was a moment, there were several weeks, almost a month, where I all I had was a diagnosis, and I knew that the cancer was in my throat but had spread to my lymph nodes. They confirmed that much, that I had cancer and it was in my lymph nodes, but I had to get something that was called a PET scan, which scans your entire body and detects cancer cells. So I didn't know if it had spread to other organs in my body. So there was like a couple weeks to, like, I think it was like 3 weeks where I was waiting to find out if, like, basically if like I was gonna die or if it was manageable. So like obviously that's a pretty fucking freaky place to be already in your mind, but that also made me think about like these albums, and you know, the way that I think about writing and recording music already. I mean, it sounds kind of lofty, but the way that I think about my music is like, this is my life's work and this is what I'm going to leave behind. If there's a world left after I'm gone, this is what I'm going to leave behind. And these albums specifically, I had to think of it like these, you know, these could be the last two albums I ever put out into the world. And am I okay with that? And the answer was yeah. Like, I'm proud enough of these albums that like I would be okay with these being the last two pieces of art that I put out into the world. And, you know, they were the final statements that I got to make before I passed on into the wild blue yonder, you know? So, yeah, I mean, it's big ideas and it's scary shit to think about, but it also made me sort of like reflect on myself and on my art and on my music. And now I'm going to think of every album I record like that. Am I going to be okay with it being the last thing I ever do? Because that's how you should think about shit, you know, in your everyday life, I think.
I mean, do you have, if we do think of each of these works as possibly the last thing that we put out into the world, do you have regrets about the previous albums? Is there anything you'd improve about those or change?
Mm, I never really think about that. It's that's, you know, that's pointless to me. Like it's stuff that's finished and it's out in the world, and I'm proud of it. We're all proud of every recording that we've done. So I've never even thought about that actually. Like, would I change anything? Because I can't. So I would
Right.
rather move forward and figure out what the next thing is than dwell on anything in the past.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because we not funny, haha, but uh, the 2 years that we went through the pandemic, you know, especially those first 6 months, I spent a lot of time talking to bands who had albums coming out, or had albums that were delayed, you know, because of the pandemic. Um, and this never really came up, even though it was possibly something that we all could have faced. You know, any number of people that I spoke to, including myself, um, might have, you know, might have gotten corona and not come out of it. And like, in terms of leaving something behind, you know, I feel like that's something that all musicians and all artists think about to a certain extent. But with you, I think it was very much present on your mind as you're finishing this up. Um,
Yeah.
I Yeah. Sorry. Do you want to say anything?
No, no, I was just confirming what you said. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
definitely at the front of my mind at the time.
Yeah. Uh, and I had the drummer from Voivod on the podcast, and of course, when their guitarist died, he left behind, you know, albums like plural worth of music for the band to keep going. Was that on your mind at all? Did you want to? I mean, did you think about like what what the next Ulthar album might be? I mean, obviously, this was a very serious thing that you're dealing with at the time, so that was probably mostly what
Yeah,
you're focused on?
I mean, a- as soon as as soon as I started treatment, which was radiation and chemotherapy, which had me like for the large part bedridden for months and months and months. The way I kept busy was by writing music. My body was all fucked up, but my hands worked fine, is what I tell people. So I basically like sat in my bed with an acoustic guitar and wrote music for months. And I do have albums worth of material. Nothing for Ulthar actually. For my other bands, yes, I've written multiple albums, and I'm about halfway. I was working on another solo album today, like before I got on this call, which was it was all shit that I wrote while I was sick. So yeah, I mean, I did I did something similar. Like uh, that was that was how I kept myself busy. Was just like making music. Even though it wasn't with other people, it was just by myself, but just creating music. For down the road, like writing songs. If it was just in Guitar Pro, it was like I was writing songs for future albums. And I couldn't think of a better way to like stay productive while my body was like you know taking a shit, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned that you have one more appointment, one more set of tests. But am I correct in saying that for the most part, the treatment has been successful and your prognosis is good?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The test that I'm taking in March is, and like I mentioned earlier, that I took a PET scan, which is the full body scan to make sure that shit hasn't spread. It's another PET scan, and I had a PET scan in December that was like the big one after the treatment to see if the treatment had worked, and it confirmed that yes, the treatment had worked. Um, they saw a little bit of what they call signal around my lymph nodes, which is probably just it's probably just remnants of the cancer that they killed with radiation, basically. So the appointment in March is basically just to confirm that what the doctors already think, that it's gone, that it's okay, that I beat it. It's just to confirm that, because the one in December was a little too soon after the treatment to be 100% accurate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, wow. I mean, that's intense, man. I'm sorry you had to go through this.
Yeah, it was fucking crazy. It's even now, like I do feel a lot better. I'm getting my energy back. I'm doing normal shit like I did before I got sick. It's crazy to just think like, wow, that happened to me. That like, I all that time I spent in the hospital and all the needles in my arms and all the crazy shit I went through, that actually happened to me. And the process of like telling everybody in my family like, hey, I have cancer. Like, I don't know how bad it is. That's something that actually happened to me, that I went through. And it's kind of a mind fuck that I'm even sitting here now talking about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I appreciate you being so open about this. I mean, I was thinking like, from the point when I was in a band and I was doing vocals, my throat always hurt and or was always kind of scratchy. And so you know, I don't know if I would have noticed like if there was something wrong with my throat because it always kind of felt like shit. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
when did you realize that something was wrong or something was out of the ordinary?
Well, like I said, it stayed scratchy after I finished recording the vocals for like a month and a half. But it wasn't so bad that I thought I should like go to the doctor. I just had this really minor sore throat, which I thought was kind of weird. The point that I knew I had to go and get it checked out and get it biopsied was, um, I I was just walking down the street and I like felt my neck, and I felt a lump in my neck, which was where it had spread to my lymph nodes. They were all
Right.
swollen up, so I had a big lump in my neck, and I was like, that's not right. So yeah, I went to urgent care like that day, to get it checked out.
Yeah.
took another month to actually diagnose it, but that was the point that I knew I had to go see somebody about it.
I mean, it sounds like you caught it in time. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, by all appearances, you know, every doctor I've seen has said like you caught it early enough and treatment worked. And actually, the type of cancer that I had um, very commonly spreads to the lymph nodes, but it's very, very uncommon that it spreads any further than that, which I wish I would have known that for the 3 weeks while I was waiting to find out if I had cancer all over my body. But yeah, uh, I'm very lucky. I feel very lucky that things have panned out the way that they have. They could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that uh, things are moving in a positive direction. You mentioned talking to your family about this. How many people outside of your immediate family and close friends knew what you're going through?
Oh, a lot. Like
Okay.
I'm, I, I do keep in touch with a lot of friends. Like I said, I moved to Washington D.C. just under 2 years ago, between a year and a half and 2 years ago. And you know, most of my friends are back in California, so I keep in touch with all them. I try to stay current with everybody. I try to maintain my friendships and stuff. I'm not on social media. I really hate social media. So I kind of feel like I have to make an extra effort to keep in touch with my friends and family. Um, so yeah, I mean, I tried to tell everyone that would want to know what was going on, which was a long, long list of people.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not the type of person that would have, you know, go on Facebook and make a fucking Facebook update about it or anything. That feels weird to me that people do it that way.
Yeah. Uh, but that would mean that fans of the band didn't know what you're going through, right?
Yeah. I don't
Yeah.
think, I don't think people really, I've talked about it in a couple interviews, but, yeah, I mean, the band never put out a statement or anything like that. So I don't think the average Ulthar listener had any idea what's going on, and probably still doesn't unless they read interviews or whatever.
Yeah. And for the people who are listening to this, is there anything you want to tell them?
Um, thanks for for listening to my music and supporting Ulthar as a band. We try to be very honest and upfront about what we do, and just create cool, interesting, unique music for ourselves, but also for people to just enjoy. Um, and if that's something that you dig, check it out. And thank you for if you've already checked it out and dig what we do. Thank you for doing that. I guess that's about it.
Yeah. And the albums are out now. Do you guys have plans beyond that for the rest of the year?
No, like I said, we can't really book tours right now, because, until my voice comes back. We're
Right.
definitely excited about booking tours when we can actually do that. We just don't know when that'll be. And we've talked about what we're going to do next, recording wise, but we haven't landed on any particular plan at this point. We're not sure what we're going to do next. We've joked about like our next album is going to be like a 3 song EP of like 2 chord punk songs, just because we're so exhausted from putting these 2 albums together. But I don't know, whatever we do, it's going to be something weird, and interesting. I think that's all we know how to do.
Cool. So Anthronomicon and Helionomicon are out now through 20 Buck Spin. Shelby, how can people order the album? What's the best way to get them? Order the
You can order
albums, I
them
should say.
through 20. They're both available through 20 Buck Spin, either 20buckspin.com or on 20 Buck Spin's Bandcamp. They're not.
Uh, do you want to say anything about the physical releases that 20 Buck Spin are putting out, the limited vinyl and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, each album has I think three different vinyl variants, and I think that they're mostly still in stock. Well, I'm not sure. um, but yeah, Dave always does something cool. Vinyl. Like I think 20 Buck Spin's pretty notorious for a pretty vinyl, and this is no different. He's done some really cool shit with the packaging and stuff.
And if people want to follow Ulthar online, what's the best way to do that?
You just Google Ulthar band. I don't really know. I don't run our social media or anything, so I don't know what our. I think it's like at Ulthar underscore Oakland, even, which is funny because two of us don't live in Oakland anymore. But yeah, you can if you're interested, you can Google. You'll find us.
And
But
there'll
you
be
should quit
links.
social media.
You should quit social media, but I'll have links to the social media pages on the website.
Yeah, if you
Uh,
insist on having social media, that's where you can find us.
Actually, do you want to expand on that? I'm mostly ambivalent about social media. If I didn't have to use it, I would not use it at all. I'm, and as somebody who like rarely speaks to people in my actual everyday life, I don't really feel a need to correspond with people over social media. But I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Oh, I mean, to put it as simply as possible, like I used to have social media. Maybe I think I quit like 5 or 6 years ago. Every time I went on social media, it made me feel depressed or anxious. It made me feel bad about my friends. It made me feel bad about other people. So I just don't feel bad about it anymore. And my quality of life has improved a lot without having that shit in my life. So I mean, really simply, I'm happier without that shit in my life. And I think it makes people act really weird. And I think it's kind of like tearing at the seams of society in some gross ways. So I just prefer to not be involved with it.
I mean, originally I thought social media is kind of seeing sides of people that you didn't know they had, or people would act in a way, feel emboldened to act in a way online that they wouldn't act if you were face to face. But now I'm starting to notice, and maybe this was just the job that I had and working with much younger people, but I'm starting to see that like kind of the douchiness and abrasiveness of the way people act online is becoming a day to day thing in their personal and work lives. Um, and it feels like politeness, just the basic act of like having a civil conversation is slowly being eroded. I don't know, but I'm an old man who complains about a lot of things, so maybe that's just my
Yeah, no,
cynicism.
I, I am too, and I feel the exact same way. Like that, people have lost the ability to like deal with other human beings in a face to face human way. Like people have learned to communicate through a screen, and there's no empathy, there's no sympathy. Like that's it's it's taking away our humanity. What makes us human. Um, and that's what I find so fucking scary about it.
Yeah. So you were open and very generous with your time on a lot of topics, but is there anything else you want to say before we close up?
No, I've said it all. That's it. Last will and testament.
Right. Well, hopefully not. Right.
And you know what? If I die in my sleep tonight, I'll rest well knowing that this was the last podcast I ever did.
Oh, Jesus Christ! Don't put that don't put that weight on me.
I know. I'm just fucking around.
Thanks, Shelby.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time too.